Welcome back to Real Fear Files. Today, we step into one of the most mysterious and unforgiving stretches of wilderness in North America, the legendary Appalachian Trail. Beneath its breathtaking scenery and quiet, endless miles lies a much darker side, a side most hikers never speak about once they return. In this episode, we're diving into 9 chilling, true encounters buried deep within these ancient mountains. From hikers who vanished without a trace, to eerie locations whispered about in trail shelters, to disturbing face-to-face moments with people or things that should not have been there at all. Every story you'll hear comes from real accounts, collected from lifelong hikers, rangers, and those who walked away with memories they wish they could forget. Some names and details have been changed for privacy, but the fear behind these experiences is very real. Out here, where civilization fades and the wilderness takes over, danger hides where no guidebook ever warns you. And for some, the trail follows them long after they leave it behind. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to Real Fear Files for daily true horror stories that creep into the corners of your mind. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment when the unknown comes calling. Back in the spring of 2019, my life was basically stuck in a soul-sucking loop. I had just quit my corporate gig in Atlanta, one of those gray cubicle nightmares where you spend 8 hours tapping out emails that could have easily been texts and sitting in meetings that never should have existed. I was fried. My brain felt like old wires sparking in the wrong places. I needed something real, something raw, something that reminded me I was actually breathing. So I bailed out of the city and decided to hike the Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail. Nothing crazy like a full through hike, just a few weeks to shake the stress out of my bones and maybe figure out what direction my life was supposed to go. I had been camping plenty before, but this, solo backpacking, this was new territory. Looking back now, I had no idea how much the trail was about to school me on instinct, trust, and the kind of survival fear that crawls down your spine like ice water. By day 5, things had been straight up magical. I'm talking the kind of magic you feel deep in your chest. Your feet hurt, your clothes stink, but your brain finally gets quiet. No buzzing phone, no deadlines, just walking, eating, sleeping, repeating. I'd bumped into a handful of other hikers along the way, swapped trail names, shared ramen dinners, laughed at dumb jokes. The vibe was exactly like the blogs had promised. Kind, supportive, genuine. I let my guard down. Completely. Stupidly. That was mistake number 1. On the 5th night, clouds rolled in like bruises on the sky, and I barely reached Blood Mountain Shelter before the storm exploded. The place was already loaded with hikers, maybe 8 or 9 squeezed into a spot meant for 12. Everyone was damp, cranky, and hustling to claim floor space before darkness swallowed the woods. I slid into a corner, rolled out my bag, and started unpacking. That's when I noticed him. He looked around late 50s or early 60s, with leathery skin and a patchy gray beard. He was sitting right near the entrance, completely still, just watching everyone with this slow, steady stare. Made my nerves twitch a little. But then he flashed a friendly smile and introduced himself as Ridge, definitely a trail name. His voice was deep and weirdly soothing, like old radio static. He jumped right into offering trail advice. Water sources ahead, tricky rocky sections, shelters worth stopping at. He seemed helpful, smart, one of those been out here forever guys. Other hikers were chatting with him too. He seemed to know everyone's plans, where they started, where they were headed. He was smooth, charismatic, the kind of person you instinctively trust. And I did. Way too fast. When the storm hit full force, the rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like a stampede. Lightning kept turning the trees outside into ghostly silhouettes. Ridge kept the vibe cheerful, cracking jokes, telling stories, passing around extra snacks. He even handed out sips from a little whiskey flask, the kind of thing that warms your chest and makes you forget you're surrounded by strangers in the middle of a storm. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have bumped into someone like him my first week out. He seemed safe, solid. Around 10, people started crashing for the night. The rain kept pounding. The woods were black as ink except when lightning flashed. I crawled into my sleeping bag fully clothed, pack under my head like a pillow. Same routine as always. Ridge settled down near the entrance. He said goodnight in that friendly voice. Within an hour, the whole shelter was snoring. I don't know what woke me. Maybe that ancient gut instinct humans used before we invented locks and streetlights. But I woke up into complete darkness with a jolt, heart already thumping. It took my eyes a minute to adjust, and that's when I saw him. Ridge was crouched right beside my sleeping bag, close, too close, maybe 2 feet from my face. My pack was open beneath his hands. He was digging through it, slow and careful. Then lightning flashed, and I saw the knife in his other hand. A 4-inch blade, not huge, but in that moment it looked monstrous, like something ripped straight out of a nightmare. My body froze, my heartbeat stuttered. Horror crawled up my spine like spiders. We locked eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't look embarrassed, didn't try to hide the knife. His face stayed calm, blank, eerie. And that's when the truth slammed into me like a truck. This man wasn't just sketchy, he was dangerous. I bolted upright and my voice shot out way louder than I meant.
"What the hell are you doing?"
My shout woke people instantly. Headlamps flicked on, bodies shifted. Confused voices filled the darkness. Ridge stood up slowly, still gripping my pack and that knife. His whole warm grandpa vibe evaporated. His eyes turned cold, like dead glass. He said in this flat voice that he was protecting me, that he thought someone else had been messing with my stuff, that he was keeping watch. But I could see some of my gear sticking out of his pockets. Other hikers were noticing their stuff missing too. A woman's headlamp, a guy's wallet. We quickly realized Ridge had been creeping through everyone's bags while we slept, stealing like he had all the time in the world. When we pulled items from his sleeping bag, stuff from half the shelter, his expression twisted into something venomous. He started yelling, calling us clueless amateurs, bragging about hiking for 30 years, saying he deserved whatever he took. The knife was still in his hand. People backed away quick. Marcus, a big dude built like a linebacker, tried to talk him down. Bad move. Ridge lunged at him with the blade, and the whole shelter exploded in panic. Shouting, scrambling, people trying not to get stabbed. Through the chaos, I remembered my emergency beacon. My parents had forced me to bring it. Hands shaking, I grabbed it and smashed the SOS button. Ridge saw. His face drained. He screamed that I had ruined everything. Then he said something that turned my blood to slush. "The Rangers are already looking for me." When those words came out of Ridge's mouth, the whole shelter went dead quiet for a split second, like the storm itself held its breath. Then the panic surged back twice as strong. 2 of the bigger hikers grabbed him from behind. Ridge thrashed like something feral, the knife flashing in the headlamp beams. After a messy struggle, they managed to pin him down and knock the blade out of his hand. Someone kicked it across the shelter floor. Someone else grabbed paracord and tied his wrists and ankles tighter than a shipping knot. Ridge kept spitting curses at us, twisting on the ground like an animal caught in a trap. His voice didn't sound human anymore, more like a growl, guttural, hateful. I scooted as far back against the wooden wall as I could, heart still hammering. The emergency beacon blinked a steady red light beside me, like a warning siren in miniature. Time dragged. No one lay down. No one even sat comfortably. We all just hovered, tense, waiting, listening to Ridge rant about how we didn't deserve the trail, how we had ruined his life, how we would pay for this. Every word slithered through the dark like poison. Outside, the storm kept slamming the roof, but the thunder felt farther away now. The worst of it had passed. Every distant boom made us jerk anyway. It felt like hours. My brain was convinced we were trapped in some warped nightmare loop. But eventually, maybe 45 minutes later, we heard voices echoing through the dripping trees. Flashlights swept across the rain-soaked ground outside the shelter. Boots clomped through mud. Then 2 park rangers appeared in the doorway, soaked to the bone, breathing hard from the climb. The moment their eyes landed on Ridge tied up on the ground, something flickered across their faces. Recognition, shock, relief, and a little anger. They knew him. One ranger muttered a curse under his breath. The other stepped forward and snapped a pair of cuffs around Ridge's wrists, like this was a scene they'd been rehearsing. Ridge tried to twist away, screaming at them, but they weren't having any of it. They hauled him upright with zero hesitation, and that's when we learned the truth. Ridge wasn't just a thief. He wasn't some quirky, lonely drifter with a habit of pocketing snacks. He had been out on the trail for months, drifting between shelters, targeting mostly solo women. There were reports of stalking, aggressive confrontations. One woman had barely escaped an attack 3 weeks earlier near a different shelter. The rangers had been tracking him, but Ridge kept moving, changing his look slightly, using different trail names. He stayed just slippery enough to avoid being caught. My beacon ping was the thing that finally nailed his exact location. When the rangers dragged him toward the shelter entrance, Ridge jerked his head back at me. His eyes were hollow and furious, like charred coals. "You'll regret this," he hissed, voice cracking like something rotten. I felt the blood drain straight out of my face. The rangers shut him up quick and let him out into the thinning rain. Their flashlights faded as they hiked him down the mountain. None of us moved for a long minute. Then everything hit at once. People started talking, fast, loud, panicked. We compared stolen items, sorted through what Ridge had stashed. A woman near the front broke down sobbing, saying she'd felt weird about him earlier, but ignored it because everyone else seemed relaxed. Her words punched me right in the gut. I felt the same way. Like I'd almost let myself walk into something awful because he seemed friendly. We stayed awake the rest of the night. Nobody even pretended to sleep. We sat close, sharing leftover snacks, whispering about what could have happened if I hadn't woken up. The storm outside drifted off into a soft drizzle, but inside the shelter the fear still clung like damp clothes. When the sky finally lightened, we packed up in silence. No one wanted to be alone. Marcus, 2 other hikers, and I decided to stick together for a while. The trail looked different that morning, still beautiful, but with an edge I hadn't noticed before. Like the woods were watching us back. As we hiked down the mountain, the adrenaline slowly wore off, leaving something heavy in its place. I kept replaying the moment I opened my eyes and saw Ridge crouched beside me, the cold knife in his hand, that eerie, calm look on his face, the way his voice twisted into something evil when he was caught. It made my stomach flip every time. Part of me wanted to quit right there, call for a ride, go home, lock my door, pretend I'd never stepped foot on the AT. I felt stupid, naive, like I had floated into the wilderness with this goofy idea that nature was safer than the city, that danger couldn't reach me out here. But then another part of me, the stubborn part, kept whispering that I had acted fast, that I had done something brave, that I had stopped him from hurting someone, maybe even saved a life. The next week, hiking with Marcus and the others helped. We joked around, made dumb trail meals together, talked about music and movies and everything except Ridge. Every night someone kept watch, not because we expected danger, but because the instinct to stay alert had settled deep in our bones. I finished my section hike 3 weeks later. When I stepped off the trail, everything felt different. Not ruined, just clearer, sharper. I still hike, but I do it with my eyes open, listening to my gut, noticing the vibes of people around me. I don't blindly trust every friendly stranger with a trail name, but I also don't let fear own me. That night at Blood Mountain taught me that instincts exist for a reason, that the thin line between safe and unsafe can snap in the blink of an eye, that the scary feeling in your gut is not a weakness, it's an alarm. I'm grateful I woke up, grateful I had that emergency beacon, grateful there were other hikers around, grateful Ridge didn't get the chance to do whatever he had planned. The trail is still beautiful, still worth walking. But now I move through it with a little more caution, a little more awareness, and a whole lot more trust in that quiet voice inside me, the one that saved my life. This all went down in October of 2021, a trip I had been hyping up for months. And I wasn't heading into the woods by myself this time. My trail partner was a dude I'd known through an outdoor meetup group for about 2 years. I'll call him Ridge. Not his real name, just the nickname everyone used. He was that classic wilderness pro type, knew the stars, knew the plants, knew how to spark a fire during a monsoon. The kind of guy who made you feel like you could walk straight into the deep woods and come out laughing. So when we planned a week-long section hike through Shenandoah National Park, tracing part of the Appalachian Trail, I felt stupidly safe. Like nothing could go wrong as long as Ridge was next to me. That confidence? Yeah, it turned out to be the most dangerous thing I brought on that trip. We kicked off our hike on a Tuesday morning, mid-October. The leaves were full-on fire colors, reds, golds, bright oranges. The weather was nearly perfect. Cool air, clear sky, and the kind of breeze that keeps bugs from bothering you. We knocked out around 12 miles that first day and camped near a shelter. That night, we sat cross-legged around our little stove, stuffing our faces with dehydrated meals and mapping out the days ahead. Ridge was in a killer mood, cracking jokes, telling wild stories about random survival trips he'd done. He kept saying he wanted to explore side trails, maybe poke around in the less traveled corners of the park. Hidden spots most hikers never bother with. I said sure. I trusted him like you trust the seatbelt in your car. The next morning, while we were packing up, an older local guy wandered up the trail toward us. He didn't look like a hiker at all, just regular clothes, a simple walking stick. He chatted us up, asked where we were headed. Trail small talk, nice enough, harmless. Then he told us about a shortcut, said that a few miles ahead near Skyland, an unmarked path branched off the main trail. According to him, it cut out 4 or 5 miles. He said it used to be an old fire road, mostly reclaimed by the forest, but still usable if you knew the signs. He even scratched out a little map on a scrap of paper, showed us exactly where to leave the main trail. I remember feeling uneasy. Something about leaving the marked path just felt wrong. The whole point of hiking the AT is, well, hiking the AT. But Ridge was fascinated. He grilled the guy with questions about the terrain. The local claimed he'd lived there his whole life, used to hunt those woods, knew them like the back of his hand. Ridge called it a fun detour, an adventure. And honestly, the idea of shaving off a few miles did feel tempting. My feet weren't loving me at that point. So we thanked the guy and kept going. Around noon, we hit the spot he'd marked. At first, I saw nothing but thick woods and undergrowth. But Ridge said he could see where the old road had been. A shallow dip in the ground. Younger trees. Subtle stuff only someone like him would notice. We pushed in maybe 50 feet, and sure enough, found what might have been a path once upon a time. Ridge took the lead, using his poles to shove branches aside, testing the ground before stepping. I stuck close behind him, watching his bright orange backpack like a lifeline. If I lost sight of that pack, I might as well have been blindfolded. For the first hour, everything seemed chill enough. The path went in the direction we expected, and heading downhill made sense if it was a shortcut. But slowly, I noticed the woods changing. The trees grew thicker. The light got dimmer. The canopy above swallowed sunlight like something hungry. And the path? It kept fading until we weren't even sure it was a path anymore. Ridge kept stopping to look around, trying to read the land. He said he had it under control, so I kept quiet. Around 2 o'clock, Ridge told me he wanted to scout ahead. The path was pretty much vanished by then, and he wanted to climb up to some ridge about a quarter-mile north to get a better view. He said it'd help us orient ourselves. He told me to stay put. He'd be back in 20 minutes. 30 tops. He moved like lightning when he was alone, so it made sense. I sat down on a fallen log, munched on a granola bar, sipped water, and watched him disappear into the trees. 20 minutes went by. Then 30. Then 45. At first I wasn't worried. Ridge could handle anything. Maybe he found tricky terrain. Maybe he saw something interesting. But after an hour, I started calling his name. No answer. After an hour and a half, I was yelling loud enough to shred my throat. Nothing. It felt like my voice wasn't even traveling, like the trees were just swallowing the sound whole. At 3:30, full panic had set in. I tried retracing our path back toward the AT, but everything looked identical. Each tree looked like its twin. Every rock formation felt like a copy. I had been watching Ridge the whole time and hadn't noted a single landmark myself. I checked my phone. 0 signal. The offline maps only showed the main trail. Nothing about whatever weird pocket of forest we were stuck in. I tried to stay calm. Tried to remember all that survival mindset stuff. But Ridge was somewhere out there, maybe hurt, maybe lost, probably both. I couldn't sit still. I spent the next 4 hours searching. I climbed where I thought the ridge was. I yelled until my voice broke. I blew my emergency whistle until I was dizzy. Nothing answered. As sunset crept in, the forest changed. The shadows twisted. The air grew cold. The woods went dead silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just suffocating quiet. Like something huge was holding its breath. I finally stopped walking when it was pitch black. A twisted ankle out here would finish me. I found a boulder, bundled every layer I had, and pressed myself against it. I didn't sleep. Not even for a minute. Every tiny noise felt like something creeping. And the whole time, my brain kept looping one question. Where did Ridge go? When dawn finally crawled in, I was barely functioning. Cold, thirsty, fried nerves. But I forced myself to move. I picked a direction and walked. Around 10, I stumbled onto a stream. Thank God. I followed it downhill, hoping it'd lead to something human. 3 hours later, I saw it. A white blaze. The Appalachian Trail. I dropped straight to my knees and cried like a little kid. I hiked north to the nearest shelter, found other hikers, and they helped me call for help using a satellite phone. Within 2 hours, search and rescue teams were gearing up. They asked for every detail I could give them. Where we left the AT, which direction Ridge climbed, what the terrain looked like. They listened carefully, scribbling notes, organizing one of the biggest searches Shenandoah had seen in years. They brought in dogs, helicopters, volunteers, thermal drones, people hiking grid patterns, the works. Hundreds of trained searchers covering miles of forest. They searched for 2 weeks, and they found nothing. Not a scrap. Not a torn piece of fabric. Not a boot print. Not a broken branch that could have been his. It was like Ridge had stepped off the earth. Eventually, the search was scaled back to occasional sweeps. His family was shattered. I was shattered. I kept replaying that moment, him walking away, his orange backpack fading into those dark trees. 3 years crawled by. 3 years of wondering, of guilt, of waking up sweating from nightmares where I heard him calling for me, but couldn't find him. Then, in October of 2024, 2 hunters stumbled on human remains 15 miles from where Ridge and I had left the marked trail. Dental records confirmed it was him. But here's the part that twists my stomach every time I think about it. The spot where they found him had already been searched multiple times during the original operation. Search teams had walked straight through it with dogs, metal detectors, and drones overhead. Yet nothing had been there. No body, no gear, no signs. And when the hunters found him, his remains were lying in an open area that anyone should have seen instantly. No scatter pattern from animals. No sign he'd been dragged there recently. No evidence of him being moved. It was like he had been lying there the entire time, somehow invisible. The medical examiner couldn't even figure out how he died. No trauma, no dehydration indicators. His gear was intact. His water bottle was half full. It made no sense. Ridge didn't die of exposure. He didn't starve. He didn't fall. He just stopped. And even if he had collapsed from something unexplained, that still wouldn't explain how he wound up so far from where he went missing, or how dozens of professional searchers missed a body in a wide open space. Nothing about it added up. None of the logical explanations fit. None of the theories gave closure. Because the truth is, the forest had changed the second we stepped off the main trail. There was something wrong out there, something ancient, something patient, something that didn't want to be found or understood, something that swallowed Ridge whole and then spat him back out years later, like gravity didn't work the same in that place. I haven't set foot in Shenandoah since. Just thinking about those warped trees, that thick silence, that horrible feeling of being watched makes my chest tighten. I'm grateful I followed that stream, grateful I made it out. Because deep down, I don't think those woods were planning on letting either of us leave. But I will never stop wondering what happened to Ridge during those lost hours. And I will never forget that feeling, that I stepped into a part of the forest where the rules of the world didn't apply, where time bent, where sound died, where people disappear without a trace, and sometimes come back when they shouldn't. The Appalachian Trail is mapped, marked, and walked by thousands every year. But just a few yards off that trail, there are places that do not want to be found. And if you wander into them, you might never walk back out. This all went down in the late fall of 2020, right near the end of November. I was doing something most people would have called straight up stupid. I was trying to finish a section of the Appalachian Trail in Maine before the winter closure officially kicked in. Yeah, I know. Dumb. Looking back, it was probably the worst timing of my life. But I wasn't thinking clearly back then. I was dealing with some messy personal stuff, and I needed space. I needed the woods. I needed to feel small and alone and tested. Normally, I hiked in spring or summer with great weather and plenty of backup plans. But that year, I wanted something raw, something that hurt a little, something that forced me to face myself without distractions. I wanted cold, I wanted silence, and I wanted the kind of isolation that leaves you alone with nothing but your heartbeat. The first 3 days went surprisingly well. Cold, sure, nights in the 20s, breath turning to fog every time I exhaled. But the sky stayed clear and the winds stayed mild. I made good mileage. My gear held up. I started thinking maybe I'd actually pull it off. Then came day 4. Around midday, the sky went from pale blue to this heavy, bruised gray. Big clouds rolled in like a warning. By early afternoon, snowflakes started drifting down. Within an hour, it wasn't drifting anymore. It was dumping. Thick, wet snow slapped my jacket, clung to my boots, and swallowed the trail in a whiteout haze. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The temperature plummeted. The wind started shoving me sideways. I knew I had to find shelter fast. I had a tent, sure, but pitching it in a storm like that would have been a nightmare, and staying warm through the night would have been even worse. I tried to follow the blazes, but the snow was building so fast I couldn't even trust my own eyes. I kept my head down and pushed forward, focusing on breathing steady and not freaking out. Then through the spinning snow, I saw something, dark, square, maybe 50 yards off the trail. At first I figured it was one of the AT lean-tos, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't. It was a cabin. A full-on, four-walled, actual cabin. I hesitated. I knew there were old hunting shacks around this part of Maine, some abandoned, some private, some belonging to people who'd shoot first and ask later. But in a storm like that, I didn't have choices. It was shelter or possibly hypothermia. I approached slow, calling out to see if anyone was inside. No answer. The place looked dark and dead. I tried the door, and it swung open like it had been waiting for someone. The relief I felt stepping inside was immediate. The wind cut off. The snow stopped hitting my face. The air was cold but not freezing. I took a breath that didn't hurt. The inside was one room, 15 by 20 feet maybe. A wood stove in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a single cot, and shelves full of old canned food. Everything had a thick layer of dust, like the place had been untouched for years. But as I looked around, something didn't sit right. One chair, the one closest to the table, was spotless. No dust, no cobwebs, no grime, just clean. My boots were the only fresh prints on the floor. No one had walked to that chair. No one had sat there recently, at least not according to the dust. I tried to brush off the unease. Maybe the dust had settled weird. Maybe the storm was messing with my head. I was freezing, exhausted, and not exactly thinking sharp. I found dry wood stacked by the stove, so I started a fire. The cabin warmed up quick, almost too quick. I set my pack down, pulled out my camp stove, and started heating water. That's when I saw it. A small leather notebook sitting on the table next to that spotless chair. I swear it hadn't been there when I came in. I scanned the table earlier. It was empty. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting inside dated back to 2015. It started normal. Notes about hunting, the weather, seeing a few deer. But after a handful of pages, the tone changed. Hard. The writer said he felt like he was being watched. He mentioned seeing movement in the trees, figures standing still, too tall and too thin to be animals. Footsteps at night, breathing outside the windows. He tried convincing himself it was just wildlife, but the entries grew more panicked. He said there were people out there. People who didn't move during the day. People who only came close at night. People who circled the cabin in the snow for hours. The handwriting became jagged and shaky. The writer talked about barricading the door, staying awake for days, hearing voices outside whispering his name. In the final entries, he said the watchers were leaving things. Dead animals, bone piles, strange symbols scratched in the snow. Then came the last page. One short final entry. I hear them inside the walls, scratching. They're in the cabin now. I slammed the journal shut. My skin crawled. Every hair on my arms stood up. I told myself it was the ramblings of someone who lost their mind in isolation. Cabin fever, paranoia. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I went to the grime-covered window and wiped a patch clean. Through the swirling snow, I saw it. A figure. Tall. Still. Standing between the trees about 30 feet away. My breath froze. I blinked. It was still there. I checked the other window. Another figure. Then another. I counted 6 shadow-like shapes forming a loose circle around the cabin, all facing me, none moving. My heart hammered like it wanted out of my chest. I backed away slowly, praying I was imagining it. And then one of them moved. Just a tiny tilt of the head. But it was enough. The moment that figure tilted its head, something inside me snapped tight. Instinct, fear, whatever, my body made the decision before my brain caught up. I stepped away from the window, grabbed my pack, and started stamping out the fire with my boot. The inside of the cabin dimmed, shadows stretching along the walls like they were breathing. The scratching started again. Not loud, not frantic, soft, deliberate, like fingertips dragging lightly on wood. It came from behind the back wall at first, then from the left, then above. Moving, following me. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt glued shut. I kept telling myself this had to be an illusion. The figures outside were trees, the scratching was the storm, the journal was fiction. People break down alone in the woods all the time. Maybe the last guy had imagined everything, and now I was doing the same. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining the way those figures stood. Perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching. I backed toward the door, barely breathing. I didn't know what was safer, inside or outside, staying still or running, calling for help or keeping quiet. Then something broke the stalemate. A voice whispered through the cabin. Not loud, not aggressive, but close. Too close. Don't go. I froze so hard my muscles locked. My vision tunneled. I stared at the doorway, expecting someone to step into the frame. No one did. The whisper hadn't come from outside. It came from behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Cold. Still. The notebook sat on the table like a dead thing. The shelves watched me with hollow eyes. Then the whisper came again, right beside my ear this time. Stay. I lunged for the door, yanked it open, and bolted into the snow. The wind hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. The storm had weakened, snow was still falling, but the world wasn't white out anymore. The trees stood clear and black against the gray dawn light. But the figures were gone. All 6 of them. They hadn't walked away. No footprints, nothing. Just empty snow where they'd stood a minute before. Something rustled behind me. I didn't turn around. I ran, hard. My boots punched through deep snow with every step, legs screaming, lungs burning. I didn't care. Adrenaline pushed me faster than I'd ever moved in my life. The forest felt wrong now. Too quiet. Too heavy. Too alert. Like the whole place had woken up and started listening. The branches above creaked softly, almost rhythmically, almost like breathing. I looked back only once, and I wish I hadn't. The cabin door was shut again. not swinging, not half open the way I'd left it. Shut, nestled perfectly into the frame. And in the window, just above the glowing reflection of the fire I thought I had extinguished, something tall stood watching me leave. I whipped my head forward and kept running, fighting the urge to scream. I ran for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. Eventually, I reached a section of trail where the snow wasn't as deep, and the AT blaze on a birch tree nearly made me cry from relief. Civilization, or at least the official trail, was somewhere behind it. By then the scratching noises had stopped following me. Or maybe I was too focused on moving to hear them. My brain buzzed with static. My heartbeat wouldn't slow down. And then I heard something else. Footsteps. Not mine. Not echoing. Following. Crunch. 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 Slow. Heavy. Deliberate. I spun around. Nothing. Just snow. Trees. Gray sky. No footprints either. Just the ones I had made. I kept moving, faster now, scanning everything around me. I was half convinced I'd lose my mind before I got out of the woods. Then somewhere behind me, from deep among the trees, came that same whisper. Stay. A raw surge of panic shot through me. I sprinted so hard I nearly fell twice. My pack slammed against my shoulders. My gloves slipped on the trekking poles. I didn't care. I needed distance. I needed people. I needed anything that wasn't this. Finally, mercifully, I reached a trail junction with signs. Actual human-made signs. Someone had posted weather warnings. Below it were fresh prints from at least 2 other hikers. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I followed those prints until I found 2 section hikers setting up camp by a frozen creek. The second they saw me, snow-caked, wide-eyed, panting, they looked terrified for reasons that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with whatever my face was showing. They asked what happened. I opened my mouth to tell them, but the words stuck in my throat. What could I say? I found a cabin that shouldn't be there? There were people in the forest, but they weren't people. I heard voices whispering my name. Anything I said would have sounded insane. So I told them the simple version. I got caught in the storm, found shelter, felt unsafe, and ran. They believed me. Or maybe they just didn't want details. Either way, they let me stay with them for the night. 3 of us cramped in one tent, wind rattling the nylon walls. But I didn't care. For the first time in hours, I didn't feel watched. But just before I fell asleep, I heard something faint outside. A soft drag. A slow scrape. Not on wood this time, on snow. Something circling the tent. I held my breath, waiting, praying the others had heard it too. But after a minute, the sound stopped. The forest went dead quiet. The next morning, I checked the snow around the tent. Nothing. No prints, no drag marks, no disturbance at all. But the cabin wasn't in my head. The notebook wasn't in my head. And the whisper sure as hell wasn't in my head. I never found that cabin again, not the day after, not the week after, not when rangers checked the coordinates I marked on my map. Nothing was there. No structure, no foundation, no trail leading to it, just untouched forest. Sometimes, when I'm hiking alone, I still feel that same cold breath on my ear. Stay. And I walk a little faster. This went down in the summer of 2018 while I was knocking out a solo section hike through Pennsylvania, right around the stretch near Duncannon. Anyone who hikes the AT knows exactly how that part is. Folks call it Rocksylvania, and yeah, it earns the name. The trail is basically miles of busted-up stones waiting to shred your boots and chew up your ankles. I wanted to finish that section anyway. Passing through Pennsylvania feels like a big milestone, even if you're only a section hiker. It means you're pushing through one of the toughest parts of the whole East Coast Trail. I'd been out for about 4 days already, dragging myself over rock fields but still keeping a decent pace, about 12 to 15 miles a day. Not impressive, not terrible, just steady. The weather was perfect the whole time. Blue skies, warm sun, light breeze. One of those rare streaks where everything goes right, and you forget that nature can chew you up without warning. I passed plenty of hikers, too. Through hikers, weekend warriors, a few college kids doing their first overnight. Everyone was smiling, swapping snacks, giving trail updates. That warm, friendly, trail family vibe was in full swing. Then on the morning of my 5th day, everything changed. I had just left the shelter I'd slept in and was maybe 2 miles into the day's walk when I rounded a bend. There, sitting on a big flat rock beside the trail, was this older guy, looked about 70, maybe older. White hair, face lined like someone who'd lived his whole life outside. But his gear, that's what stopped me. Everything he owned looked like it came straight out of the 1970s. I mean, old school, old school. He had one of those giant metal external frame backpacks, the kind that looks like a folding chair with straps. His boots were worn smooth but spotless, like he waxed them every night. He wore wool pants in the middle of summer and a faded flannel shirt buttoned to the neck. No moisture-wicking fabrics, no carbon fiber trekking poles, just a carved wooden walking stick. It felt like I'd walked into a time warp. The old man looked up with a warm smile, all gentle and calm. He told me his name was Cole and asked how my miles were going. His voice had this soft, steady tone, like he'd been teaching outdoor classes for decades. We talked a bit about the rocks, the weather, the shelters ahead. He seemed to know everything about this stretch, naming spots, describing little springs and overlooks I hadn't even seen in the guidebook. Then he mentioned a campsite about 8 miles ahead. Said it was perfect, right by a clear stream, shady trees, flat ground. He described it so well I could practically see it. After a minute, he stood up, wished me luck, and headed down the trail. Cole moved quicker than I expected for someone his age, but not so fast it made sense later. At that moment, nothing seemed strange. Some people just love vintage gear, and some older hikers are absolute beasts on the trail. I figured he was one of those tough-as-nails, old-school types. I kept hiking. Took a lunch break around noon. Stopped only long enough to eat and drink. Then I pushed on. Later that afternoon, right when the heat kicked up, I hit the campsite Cole had talked about. And damn, he hadn't exaggerated. It was perfect. A wide clearing, a bubbling stream, a ready-made fire ring, even a smooth log positioned like a chair. I dropped my pack and started setting up. I was filtering water when I heard a voice behind me. I turned, and there was Cole again. Already at the campsite, already unpacked, already settling in. And here's the part that made the hair on my arms rise. There was no way in hell he could have passed me on the trail without me seeing him. None. The trail was straight, exposed, rocky as hell. I would have noticed anyone moving even remotely close behind me or ahead of me. But he was here, smiling like he'd just strolled in a few minutes before me. I asked how he'd gotten ahead. He laughed softly, this light, airy chuckle, and said he knew a couple of old hunter paths that cut around the AT. Shortcut trails, he called them. Said he'd been roaming these mountains since he was a young man and knew all the back ways. It sounded possible, but something didn't feel right. Most people hiking the AT actually want to hike the AT. Taking shortcuts defeats the purpose. But whatever.
I pushed the weird feeling down and kept setting up camp.
That night we built a fire and talked. He told stories about the trail from decades ago, back when shelters were just 3 wooden walls and a tarp roof. He talked about tiny trail towns that had changed completely, about wildlife encounters that felt almost supernatural. The way he spoke held you in place, like each word was a piece of living history. At one point, I pulled out my phone to snap a picture of him by the fire. It would have been such a cool memory. But my phone screen didn't turn on. It was dead. Completely dead. It had been at 70% just a few hours earlier. We talked deep into the night. Eventually, Cole said he needed to turn in. He stood, nodded, and walked into the dark toward his tent. I glanced his way a few minutes later, and there was nothing. No tent, no sleeping bag, no light, no sound. Just the dark forest swallowing the space where he'd gone. I told myself I just couldn't see well in the shadows, but my stomach twisted. Something felt off. Really off. The next morning, I woke up early and checked the area where he'd camped. Nothing. No gear. No footprints. No disturbed leaves. No sign of any campsite at all. It looked untouched. I packed up fast. The air felt heavy, like the woods themselves were watching me. I pushed hard until I reached the next shelter, hoping to shake the weird feeling. 3 hikers were there, and I asked if they'd seen an old man with vintage gear. When I described Cole, they all looked at me weird. One guy joked that I'd seen a ghost. We laughed, but the joke didn't feel funny. Because an hour later, I saw Cole again. Sitting at a trail junction, waiting for me. When I saw him sitting there at that junction, calm, still, smiling like we were old friends, my whole body locked up. I hadn't heard footsteps, no rustling leaves, no breathing, just silence until he was suddenly there, perched on a flat boulder like he'd grown out of it. He greeted me like he'd been expecting me. "Morning, friend," he said, voice steady, warm, too warm. I tried to play it cool, but inside my chest my heart was slamming like a fist on a locked door. I asked him, maybe too sharply, how he got ahead of me again. He just gave that same soft, airy laugh. "Old paths," he said. "Places folks forget. I don't walk the crowded trail unless I have to." I nodded, but alarm bells were going off in my head. The woods around the junction were dead silent. No birds, no wind. Even the insects felt like they were holding their breath. Then he added something that chilled me deeper than anything so far. "You were headed the wrong way." He said it like a fact, not a question. Like he knew my plan better than I did. I opened my map just to show him I was fine, and froze. The map screen on my phone flickered, glitched, then turned black. Battery, 0%. I'd charged it back at the shelter. It should have been full. Every hair on my neck stood straight up. Cole told me there was a water source down a faint side trail that didn't show up on maps. Said it was pure, cold, untouched. He urged me to follow him so he could show me. His smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something I can only describe as hungry. No way in hell was I going with him. I made up an excuse about needing to meet friends up north. Told him I'd maybe catch him later. His smile faded just a little. Only a tiny crease at the edge of his mouth, but enough to feel like a temperature drop. He said, "Suit yourself." Then he stood, and I swear, this isn't dramatizing. The forest shifted around him. Like the shadows thickened. Like the path behind him wasn't the same one I'd just walked. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw trees bending slightly toward him, like they recognized him. He turned and walked down that narrow side trail. I watched until he disappeared between the pines. The moment he was gone, the normal forest sounds came back in a rush. Birds, bugs, wind through leaves. It felt like someone unpaused the world. I took a long, shaky breath and decided to move fast. Fast enough to get miles away before nightfall. I wasn't planning to see that man again. But the woods had other plans. By late afternoon I was wiped, ankles sore from rocks, shoulders burning under my pack. I checked my guidebook and saw a shelter was only 2 miles ahead. Relief washed over me like cold water. I pushed on. When I reached the shelter clearing, the sun was dipping low. Orange light filtered through the trees, giving everything that weird, almost unreal evening glow. The shelter looked empty. No packs, no hikers prepping dinner. I walked closer and saw someone sitting inside on the far bench. Someone in a flannel shirt. Someone with a carved wooden walking stick across his lap. My stomach dropped straight to the dirt. Cole looked up like he'd been waiting hours. "I figured you'd come this way," he said, voice gentle, steady. Wrong. My throat went dry. My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe he took another shortcut. Maybe he knew more side trails. Maybe he hiked like a machine despite his age. Something, anything, normal. But there was nothing normal about the way he sat completely still, like he wasn't breathing. Nothing normal about the way the air in the shelter felt colder by 10 degrees. Nothing normal about how my phone, even plugged into my power bank, still read 0%, like the device was drained by something other than usage. I told him I was just stopping for water. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on me like he was studying every twitch in my face. His expression wasn't threatening, but it was deep. Too deep. Like he was looking through me, not at me. Then he said quietly, "You're not supposed to camp here tonight." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. He just turned his head toward the dark forest behind the shelter. "There's something that walks here after sundown," he whispered. "Something that doesn't like being seen. The ridge isn't safe." The air grew even colder. A rational part of me wanted to brush it off as an old man's story. But another part, the primal, ancient part, felt his words in my spine. "You need to keep moving," he said. "Now." I didn't argue. Every cell in my body was screaming to go. I grabbed my pack and backed away. Cole watched me, not blinking, not shifting, just watching. As I turned onto the trail, I looked back one last time to thank him. But the shelter was empty. No sound of footsteps. No rustling leaves. Nothing. Just emptiness. And here's the final thing, the part I've never been able to explain. About a week later, after finishing the section, I stopped at an outfitter shop near the trail to buy some gear. The guy behind the counter was an old-school local. When I mentioned my route, he smiled and asked if I'd met any characters on the trail. I described Cole, laughing awkwardly because I knew I sounded ridiculous. Vintage gear, knows secret trails, warns hikers, appears out of nowhere. The shop owner's face changed instantly. Color dropped from his cheeks. He stepped closer and asked me to repeat the description. I did. He swallowed and said, "You just described a man who died out there in the early 80s. Old-timer. Loved the trail. They found his body near a side path after he went missing. Folks say he still helps lone hikers when the mountains get dangerous." He stared at me like he expected me to argue. I didn't, because I knew exactly what I'd seen. I never go back to that stretch alone anymore. And if you ever hike around Duncannon, and an old man with spotless boots and 1970s gear smiles and tells you you're headed the wrong way, don't follow him. And don't camp after sundown. This all went down in June of 2022, while I was trekking the stretch of the Appalachian Trail that hugs the North Carolina-Tennessee line, right near Roan Mountain. That whole area sits way up high, with those open grassy balds that let you see damn near the whole world in every direction. The rhododendron was just starting to explode into color, and I had planned this hike specifically to catch that jaw-dropping bloom. I'd done my homework, read the guidebooks, watched videos, chatted with hikers who had passed through. Every single one of them talked about how gorgeous it was, how tough but chill the terrain usually felt. Not a single person hinted at anything close to what I would go through that night. I should also admit something. I'm not a night hiker. I like getting to camp early, setting up, eating before sundown, and chilling until sleep. But that day, everything went sideways. A trekking pole tip snapped back at the hostel, and the outfitter didn't open until late morning. By the time I fixed it and got moving, it was pushing noon. I knew I could reach the shelter I'd marked on my map if I pushed, but it was going to be damn tight. The afternoon went smooth enough. I hiked faster than I normally would, hauling it over the switchbacks and rocky bits. The weather was perfect, blue sky, cool breeze, mid-70s temps. I passed a few hikers coming the opposite way. Everyone had that calm trail vibe. No warnings, no weirdness, just, "How's it going?" and "Stay safe." Around 7 p.m., the sun was dipping, and I had maybe 2 miles left. The trail followed a ridgeline through heavy woods. Thick trees all around me, tall hardwoods with rhododendron and mountain laurel filling the gaps. I could only see maybe 20 or 30 feet through that forest before it all turned into dark green blur. My headlamp was ready to go, but I really didn't want to use it. Something about hiking in the dark just hits different. You feel like the whole world shrinks down into a tiny bubble of light. Every noise sounds like something creeping up behind you. Then I heard it. The first scream. It came from deep in the woods off my left side, maybe 100 yards in. At first, my brain tried to label it as something normal. Thought maybe a fox. Those things can sound like someone getting murdered. Or a bobcat. Or some weird bird noise I hadn't heard before. But after a few seconds, I knew damn well it wasn't an animal. It sounded human, but wrong. Like the voice box wasn't built right. It was full of rage, pain, something feral and furious all at once. That scream shot ice straight through my bones. Every hair on my arms stood up. My body reacted before my mind did. I stopped. The whole forest went silent. No birds, no bugs, just a suffocating wall of quiet. I stood there for 2 minutes, heart pounding. I thought about turning back and hiking 5 miles in the dark to the last shelter. But that would put me even farther from people and deeper into the unknown. So I decided to push ahead, fast. About 10 minutes later, the second scream ripped through the woods. This time it came from the right side of the trail, much closer. Same twisted, throat-shredding sound, a noise that did not belong to anything on 2 feet or 4. It felt like something that shouldn't exist. My stomach dropped. Whatever was making that noise had moved from left to right without a sound. The forest was too thick to slip through quietly, but I hadn't heard a single twig snap. I started hiking faster, almost jogging. My mind was feeding me dumb explanations, pranksters, strange birds, wind whistling through rocks. But none of it matched what I'd heard. My instincts were screaming at me louder than anything else. Move. Move now. Then came the third scream. This time it wasn't off in the woods. It was directly ahead of me on the trail, maybe 50 feet around a bend. Close enough to feel it vibrate in my chest. I froze. If I left the trail, I risked getting lost in the dark. If I stayed on the trail, I had to walk straight toward whatever had made that sound. My legs felt like concrete, but I forced myself forward. When I rounded the bend, the trail was empty. No figure, no animal, nothing but shadows stretching across the dirt. But I felt watched, deeply watched, like eyes were crawling over my body from every angle. I started talking out loud, half to calm myself, half to warn whatever was out there, saying stuff like, "I'm just passing through," like an idiot, as if some nightmare thing hiding in the trees cared. That's when the forest exploded with sound. Multiple screams hit me at once, from ahead, behind, both sides, all around. A whole chorus of those twisted voices shrieking in overlapping waves. They moved fast, closer, around me, tracking me, hurting me. Then I saw movement through the trees, huge shapes slipping between the trunks, moving upright, not four-legged, not bears, two-legged, tall, wide, wrong. I broke into a run. I didn't care anymore about safety rules or advice. Instinct took over. My pack smacked my back with every stride. My lungs felt like fire. The screams followed me. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, pounding, fast. Something running alongside me through the undergrowth. Keeping pace. Staying just out of sight. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I saw it. Light. Artificial light. Headlamps. The shelter clearing. I practically collapsed into the open space. There were 4 other hikers already there, and they shot up in alarm when I stumbled in, gasping like I'd outrun death itself. Before I could even explain, one of them raised a hand and said, "We heard it too." They were pale and wide-eyed. They said the screaming had started 20 minutes earlier and had been getting closer. They were debating whether to hike out in the dark, but were too scared to leave. We all stood together listening as the screams continued from the woods. Close. Really damn close. They sounded maybe 100 feet away. Nobody joked. Nobody pretended it was nothing. Even the most experienced hiker among them looked terrified. We pulled our food inside, grabbed makeshift weapons, sticks, rocks, anything we had. Around 9 p.m., the screaming cut off completely. The silence that followed was somehow worse. We turned off our lights, sat in total darkness, and listened. That's when the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate, circling the clearing. Huge shapes moved between the trees. Tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. Thick fur, long arms. Eyes that caught the moonlight like tiny mirrors. They didn't charge. They didn't leave. They just watched us. And we didn't sleep. Not even for a second. We stayed huddled in that shelter all night. Nobody dared close their eyes, not even for a minute. We took turns scanning the tree line, but honestly, all of us were glued to the edge of the clearing. Those things didn't move like animals. They watched, assessed, circled, tested us. Every once in a while, one would step a little closer, then retreat. Just standing there in the shadows, massive and impossible. Time dragged like a nightmare. Every little sound, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, made our hearts jump. Every now and then, a low growl or a whisper of movement would ripple through the dark, and we'd freeze, barely daring to breathe. The wind carried smells we couldn't identify. Wet earth, rotting leaves, and something else. Something that smelled alive but wrong. Finally, just before the first hint of dawn, the things moved away. One last long, drawn-out scream echoed through the forest, fading into silence like it was marking the end of whatever game they'd been playing. We waited, frozen, until the dim light of sunrise crept into the clearing. Slowly, cautiously, we peeked outside. That's when I saw the handprints. Not paw prints. Hands. Huge ones. twice the size of a human hand, elongated fingers tipped with claw-like nails. They were pressed into the mud around the clearing, smudged and dark. And there were more signs of their passing. Bent saplings, broken branches, gouges in tree bark starting about 9 feet off the ground, ending around 7. Fresh wounds in the trees, sap still oozing like the forest itself had been slashed. We took photos, video, anything we could document. My hands shook too much to write. Sienna and the others did the same. Nobody dared speak, afraid we'd draw attention. The place felt alive with unseen eyes, even after the creatures had retreated. We packed up slowly, moving together as a unit. Nobody was hiking alone after that night. Not for a second. Step by step, we exited the clearing, glancing over our shoulders the entire way. Every shadow looked like it might twist into one of those things at any second. When we reached the ranger station a few miles later, we reported everything. Photos, video, descriptions. The rangers were polite, careful not to laugh, but I could tell they were skeptical. They suggested maybe bears, maybe someone pranking us. But the hands, the bipedal movement, the way they circled the clearing, it didn't match any bear behavior, not even close. I spent the following days on the trail thinking about it constantly. At night, I'd imagine them just beyond the edge of the forest, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone careless. Even after leaving the mountains, I did research. Rand Mountain has a long history of strange sightings. Locals talk about wood apes or tree giants. The Cherokee had stories of creatures living in the high ridges, screaming to mark territory, driving intruders away. I don't know what we encountered that night. I can't prove anything to anyone, and honestly, I don't want to. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. Those were not bears. Those were not humans. And those massive hands in the mud, there is no mistaking what made them. The way those things moved, the intelligence in how they circled our little camp, how they seemed to test us without rushing. It was something old, something that existed long before any of us started hiking trails for fun. Something that considers this land its own. I am thankful I wasn't alone. Sienna and the other hikers kept me grounded, kept me moving, and shared the terror so none of us faced it by ourselves. We made it to morning, alive. Shaken, pale, but alive. That's all that mattered. Some people would probably tell me to go back, to find evidence, to prove what's out there. But I've seen enough. Those mountains hold their secrets tight, and some secrets aren't meant to be disturbed. Some things are meant to stay in the dark, to haunt the ridges and hollows of the old highlands forever. I'll never forget the feeling of being hunted, the sound of those screams echoing through the forest, the sight of those impossible shapes moving upright through the trees, the shock of seeing enormous handprints in the mud and claw marks high on the bark. Every detail is burned into my memory. I don't know if anyone else has had the same experience. Maybe they have. Maybe they haven't. But I know one thing for sure. If you ever find yourself hiking the ridge trails near Roan Mountain at twilight, keep your head on a swivel. Don't go alone. Don't stray from the trail. And whatever you do, don't assume that all the eyes in the forest belong to animals. Some nights, I still hear those screams in my mind. I can picture those shapes, watching, circling, silent as the grave, waiting for the next hiker to wander too close. I'm glad I got away. I'm glad Sienna and the others got away. And I'm grateful that those creatures, whatever they are, didn't choose to follow us all the way out. Those mountains hold secrets that predate trails, predate maps, predate anyone thinking it was safe to walk through them. And I'm thankful that whatever terror lives up there gave us a chance to live, just barely, to tell the story. Some people chase adventure, some chase thrills. Me? I'll hike those trails again, but never at night, never alone, and never forgetting that there are things in those mountains that are older, faster, and far smarter than any human. And that's enough horror for a lifetime. This all went down in the fall of 2017. I was tackling a section of the Appalachian Trail in Vermont, one of my absolute favorite stretches. Those green mountains go full on fire in autumn, reds and golds blazing across the ridges. I had timed this hike to catch the foliage at its peak. Weather was perfect, the air crisp but not biting, leaves crunching under my boots. For the first few days, everything was textbook. I was pushing around 15 miles a day, hitting shelters most nights, sometimes sneaking off for stealth camps when I wanted some space. The trail community was mellow, enough social contact to be nice, but not so much that it overwhelmed me. Life on the trail was smooth, and I had zero reason to think something would go sideways. Then, on the fourth day, I noticed the markings. At first, I blew it off. Maybe the trail markers had chipped, or moss had grown weirdly over them. But the more I looked, the stranger it got. Beneath the standard white blazes were extra symbols, painted in the same chalky white, but these were not official AT markings. They were bizarre, geometric, almost runic. Circles sliced with lines, triangles dotted at their tips, shapes that made no sense on any map or guidebook I'd ever seen. I pulled out my trail guide to see if there was any mention of side markers or historical detours. Nothing. The book made no note of these symbols. I snapped a few photos, thinking I'd research them later or maybe ask other hikers. At that moment, I wasn't spooked. Vandalism happens. People carve initials into trees, spray rocks, leave dumb signs. I chalked it up to some bored hiker with too much time and paint. But then I rolled up to the shelter where I'd planned to camp that night. And that's when things went from weird to downright wrong. The structure itself was nothing special, just a three-sided wooden lean-to with a sleeping platform. But surrounding it, in a rough circle about 15 to 20 feet out, were offerings. That's the only word for them. Objects clearly placed intentionally. Animal skulls, mostly squirrels and raccoons, lined up in patterns on rocks. Bundles of dried flowers tied with frayed rope. Cheap white candles melted into stubby blobs. Pieces of paper weighed down by stones. I froze. Every instinct screamed to turn around and leave. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, drew me closer. I picked up one of the papers. Covered in strange symbols, the same ones I'd seen along the trail, mixed with words. The writing was rambling, chaotic, like the musings of someone unhinged, or someone practicing an ancient art I couldn't comprehend. It talked about debts owed to the mountains, about a trail keeper and the price of passage. Other papers repeated the theme: rituals, sacrifices, paying respects to the spirits of the woods. One paper claimed the white blazes were sacred markers guiding the worthy and tricking the unworthy. Another claimed every hiker leaves an invisible payment behind, whether they know it or not, and that it must be acknowledged. It was creepy as hell. I had no doubt someone genuinely believed this stuff, or wanted you to believe they did. No jokes, no prankster vibe, just deep, eerie conviction. I bailed on the shelter, hiked another 3 miles before setting up camp off-trail in a flat spot. Tent up, quick cold dinner, no fire, no light, no chance of drawing attention. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching. Every rustle, snap, and nightbird call felt amplified, sinister. Around 2 a.m., it happened. Voices. Distant chanting. Multiple people in unison, a rhythm rising and falling in the dark. Not words I could make out, just the cadence. 20 minutes of eerie, hypnotic chanting, then abrupt silence. My heart thumped in my chest. I clutched my knife and bear spray, waiting for shadows to move, but none did. Eventually, exhaustion snatched me, and I drifted into a broken, uneasy sleep before dawn. Morning came, and I packed fast, hiking harder than usual. Mileage didn't matter. Distance from that place did. As I moved north, the symbols continued. But this time, I noticed a pattern. They appeared at intervals, like a countdown, shapes growing more intricate as I progressed along the trail. By afternoon, I hit another shelter. No offerings, no skulls, no papers. Normal hikers around, chatting and eating. Relief hit me like a punch. I joined them, casually asking if anyone noticed anything odd on the trail recently. Silence. Then one guy, Alara, asked what I meant. I described the symbols, the first shelter, the chanting. They all went quiet. Then came the confessions. Yes, they had seen the symbols too, but hadn't said anything. They didn't want to freak each other out. One woman shared she had heard chanting 2 nights ago at another shelter. She'd glimpsed figures in the trees, moving lanterns or flashlights, vanishing by morning. We decided to hike together. Safety in numbers. 4 of us, sticking close. But the day wore on, and the signs kept piling up. Symbols at every other turn. Offerings not just at shelters, but scattered along the trail. Stone cairns topped with candles, trees wrapped in fabric marked with runes. And once, freshly killed rabbit carefully displayed on a low branch, arranged ritualistically. That night, we camped early off-trail, keeping low, fire out before dark. As darkness settled, the chanting returned. Closer this time. Lights flickering through trees. Torches, lanterns. We peeked through our tents, robed figures moving slowly, rhythmically chanting. 8 to 10 of them, cloaked and hooded, some carrying objects I couldn't identify. They passed our spot, northbound, and slowly vanished into the night. We didn't move until sunrise. Hiked 22 miles that day, the longest day we'd ever done, fueled by adrenaline and fear. Finally, we reached a trail town and went straight to the ranger station. The ranger listened politely, eyes hard to read. He said strange things had been reported in that area before. Locals called them the Trail Keepers. Believers who thought the AT sat on sacred ground, performing rituals and leaving offerings. Mostly harmless, he said, never bothering hikers directly. I showed him my video. The files? All corrupted, static. Not a single usable photo or clip. Except one frame. Just one. A robed figure, hood turned slightly. Face visible in profile, staring straight at me. I didn't stick around to test their patience. We got out. And I've never forgotten it. After that first terrifying night and the hike to the next shelter, the trail felt different. Heavy. Like the trees themselves were watching us. Every step I took was measured, my senses screaming at me. Even Alara and the others, who usually laughed at small scares, were quiet, tense. The symbols didn't stop. They started showing up almost obsessively now, carved into rocks, tied to trees with strips of cloth, sometimes painted under white blazes. Their complexity grew, lines looping, spiraling, strange marks that felt like warnings. I couldn't shake the feeling they were communicating, marking some kind of invisible boundary or path. By the afternoon of the next day, the offerings became more disturbing. We stumbled upon a cairn of stones topped with a candle still smoldering. Beside it, a small fox skull balanced unnaturally on a flat rock. I wanted to turn around, hike back to some safe town, but the others insisted we keep moving. We were 4 against whatever this was now, and isolation alone felt terrifying. Later, in a thicker part of the forest, we saw it. Or them. Shadows moving just beyond our peripheral vision. Too tall for normal animals, too deliberate to be random. Every time I tried to focus, they melted into the trees like smoke. Occasionally, flickers of torchlight or the glint of something metallic would appear, only to vanish before I could get a clear look. We made camp again, well off the trail, sun nearly gone, fire small and controlled. Every rustle of leaves felt like it was coming from something alive, hunting, studying us. Around nightfall, chanting began again. This time it was unmistakable, closer than ever, coming from multiple directions. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost pulling at your mind. My stomach churned, heart hammering, but we all knew we couldn't run blindly into the darkness. Through the mesh of the tents, we could see them. Figures moving in a slow line along the trail. Dark robes hooded over their heads, carrying flickering torches and unidentifiable objects. Their steps were deliberate, measured, like they were performing some ritual, and the chant kept rolling through the trees. 8, maybe 10 figures. I tried filming again, shaky hands, the phone almost slipping from my grip. The chant passed and faded, leaving a silence that was somehow heavier than the sound. None of us slept that night. Every sound, the wind, the snapping branches, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, made us jump. Every shadow seemed alive, breathing, waiting. We kept watch in turns, but honestly, all 4 of us were wide-eyed the entire night. Morning brought no relief. The forest looked normal, almost serene, but we all knew better. The ground told another story. Handprints, not paw prints, imprinted in the mud near our camp. Gigantic hands, twice the size of mine, fingers elongated, claws or talons marking the earth. Sap oozed from trees where the bark had been ripped in vertical gouges, starting 9 feet up, descending toward the ground. Fresh damage. Something enormous had been there. We packed fast, moving in silence, scanning every shadow. Even during daylight, the forest felt alive in a sinister way. Trees leaned over the trail like sentinels, the air heavy, dense with a smell that was faintly metallic, like blood in the leaves. At one shelter that afternoon, we stopped to regroup and ration water. Other hikers passed, oblivious to the horror we had witnessed. We tried casually asking if anyone had noticed the symbols or strange sounds, but most shrugged it off. Only one older hiker nodded, eyes darting nervously, muttering something about trail keepers before walking off. The term sent chills through me. That evening, we made camp near a small stream, choosing a hidden flat spot. We kept fires minimal, ate quickly, and settled into tents with nerves fraying. As darkness pressed in, chanting returned. Closer, louder, surrounding us. Torches weaving through the forest. I could feel the presence of more figures than I could see. The chanting now had layers, voices from different distances, echoing, overlapping. We weren't alone, and we never had been. We didn't peek through the tent. We whispered, strategized, trying to make plans in case they discovered us. But the truth? There was no running, no hiding that felt safe. We waited, hearts pounding, until the voices finally receded, fading into the shadows. The dawn was almost a relief. We emerged cautiously, looking around. Marks and offerings littered the area. Small piles of stones, branches woven into patterns, even what looked like bloodstains on leaves, faded but still dark against the earth. It was clear now. They weren't just guarding the trail, they were claiming it. We made a pact to stay together until we hit the next trail town. No one split off, no detours, just steady, cautious movement. Every shadow, every bend in the trail kept me tense, muscles coiled, eyes darting. That day we hiked relentlessly, 22 miles, the longest in our lives, driven by sheer fear and the desire to leave those woods behind. By late afternoon, the town came into view. Civilization. Safe ground. We went straight to the ranger station, recounting every detail. The ranger listened with a grim expression. "Not the first reports," he said. "Locals call them the trail keepers. Believe the AT sits on sacred ground. Leave offerings, perform rituals. Mostly harmless, don't bother hikers, but they're elusive. Hard to track, no set schedule." I asked about the chanting, the figures, the symbols. He shrugged, admitted no one knew exactly. Forest Service and police had tried investigating before, never cracked it. He cautioned us to report anything else we saw. I showed him my videos. Nothing. Files corrupted. Photos of the symbols? Same. But one frame survived. One. A figure in a dark robe, hood slightly turned, revealing the side of a face staring directly at me. I didn't need more proof. We had survived. We had seen. And that was enough. The woods of Vermont had kept their secret, and we had escaped with our sanity. Barely. I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, of the unseen hands guiding, testing, observing every step. Some trails are more than paths. Some are guarded by shadows, alive with rituals older than memory. And I'll never forget what I left behind in those mountains, or what might have followed me home. So this went down in April of 2016. I was grinding through the Virginia stretch of the Appalachian Trail. Virginia feels endless when you're slogging over 500 miles of trail. By the time this mess hit, I was about 2 weeks in. My legs felt solid. My body had synced up with the daily grind. Morning wake-ups, endless miles, aching joints that somehow just worked in rhythm. There's a flow when you're like that, where every step feels automatic, like you could hike forever. The weather had mostly been chill, sunny patches with occasional showers that never lingered. I was killing it on miles and feeling pumped about taking a whole month off work just to tackle this section. That day, I was aiming for a specific shelter the guidebook hyped as being solid, with water close by. By 5 p.m., I rolled into the clearing. Plenty of time to set up, cook a quick meal, and chill before darkness swallowed the woods. But the second I stepped into that clearing, my gut dropped. Something was off. Trash was scattered around, sadly not uncommon. But worse than that, gear was everywhere, torn and mangled. A backpack ripped open, sleeping bag shredded. And worse, dried blood smeared across the wooden floor of the shelter. My instinct screamed, "Get the hell out." But the next shelter was at least 8 miles away, and nightfall in unknown woods is sketchy. I stood there, hand on my bear spray, weighing options, when a low, pained groan floated from behind the shelter. My horror movie instincts screamed, "Run!" But some dumb human empathy made me move closer. Someone needed help. Creeping around the back, I found him. A man, probably in his 30s, slumped against the wall of the shelter. He looked wrecked, bruises all over, dried blood soaking the front of his shirt, one leg bent at a nasty angle. His eyes were glazed, full of pain and shock. He tried talking, but it came out all jumbled. I dropped my pack, pulled out my first aid kit, and started patching him up, keeping my voice steady to calm him down. He introduced himself as Canyon. Between groans, he said his hiking buddy had snapped, turned on him violently, left him here to die. His words spilled out in pieces, fragments of panic and agony. Canyon needed help, hospital-level help, and he begged me to call rescue. I fired up my satellite communicator and sent an SOS. The device confirmed receipt. Help was coming, but it would take hours. We were deep in the woods, miles from roads. I did what I could. Water, emergency blanket, trying to stabilize that mangled leg with the scraps I had. And all the while, Canyon rambled. His partner's name was Ridge. They'd been friends for years, hiking sections together multiple times before. But Ridge had been off lately, paranoid, twitchy, talking about shadows following them, obsessing over protection. Canyon thought maybe it was exhaustion or heat messing with Ridge's head. Then, overnight, Ridge supposedly lost it completely, accused Canyon of theft, and attacked him with trekking poles until he could barely move. The story was brutal, and while disturbing, I could see how isolation and trail exhaustion could push someone over the edge. I asked where Ridge was now. Canyon's face went pale. He didn't know. Ridge had vanished into the woods hours ago. Canyon had been left alone, waiting for a miracle, lying there all day. Looking back, I should have questioned the inconsistencies. The massive blood smear, the torn gear, his injuries versus the level of attack he described. But I was locked into survival mode, keeping him alive until help arrived. As darkness crept in, I set up my headlamp to shine over Canyon, sitting close to monitor him, keep him conscious. He kept talking, compulsively, repeating the story with minor twists each time. Ridge had been his closest friend. Ridge had betrayed him. Ridge was dangerous and might return. Every word was coded in fear and obsession. Around 8 p.m., movement in the woods made my blood freeze. Human footsteps, steady and approaching. Hand to bear spray, I called out, warning anyone out there I had an injured hiker and had summoned help. Footsteps froze. Then a voice answered. Ridge. He called for Canyon, worried, searching for his friend who had wandered off. Canyon tensed beside me, whispering fiercely not to trust Ridge. But the voice from the woods, it didn't feel aggressive. It was tired, scared, real. I decided to play it careful. Told Ridge to hold his spot, that I'd defend myself with spray if needed, and that rescue was en route. Ridge agreed immediately, voice shaky, saying he just wanted to find Canyon. That's when I really examined the scene. Blood in the shelter, torn packs, Canyon's injuries. Suddenly, the pieces weren't adding up. Canyon was more agitated than hurt, and the blood looked oddly staged. I eased back, subtly pulling out my flashlight. Scanning the scattered gear, I spotted a wallet through the clear window. ID showing Ridge Martinez. This was Ridge's stuff, destroyed and tossed aside. Canyon noticed me staring. His calm victim act evaporated. His face twisted, rage bubbling up. He launched into a fast, aggressive story. Ridge owed him money. They'd fought over it. This was months in the making. The attack tale was a lie. Canyon had ambushed Ridge, beaten him, robbed him, and left him for dead. Meanwhile, Ridge's voice called from the trees, confirming the real story. Canyon had gone psychotic, tried to kill him that morning, but Ridge had fought back and escaped into the forest. He had been hiding, terrified, hoping I could help. Ridge described his backpack and its contents. Everything matched what I was seeing. Canyon went ballistic, yelling he was the victim, but I could now see through the act. I shifted bear spray toward Canyon, safe but ready. The chaos of lies, the brutality, the isolation, it all clicked. Rescue arrived later that night. I laid out both sides, showed evidence. Ridge's ID, the scattered blood, the defensive wounds on Canyon. Ridge emerged from the woods, battered but alive. Canyon was restrained and evacuated separately. By daylight, rangers uncovered more chilling evidence. Canyon had tried digging a shallow grave nearby. He had intended to kill Ridge completely. And Ridge had only survived because of his strength and luck. Weeks later, the rangers contacted me. They found another body buried about a quarter-mile from that shelter, likely Canyon's previous victim from 2013. Canyon had killed before, preying on isolated hikers, taking advantage of the trail's remoteness. After that night, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. Ridge alive, battered but standing, and Canyon, the real monster, just lying there pretending to be a victim. The forest had almost swallowed him completely, and I'd been blind to it until I saw that ID. My heart still pounds, thinking about how close Ridge came to being another body hidden in the woods. The rescue team had packed Ridge into a stretcher and called in a helicopter. Canyon got hauled out on a gurney, cuffed, handcuffed, eyes blazing with pure rage and cunning. Even then, I couldn't stop picturing what could have happened if Ridge hadn't fought back. The thought makes my stomach twist. I'd spent hours keeping a murderer alive, giving him water, trying to comfort him while he might have been plotting how to end both our lives. Rangers gave me the rundown at daylight. They'd found the shallow grave Canyon had tried digging. Tools and evidence of struggle were scattered around. It was all too clear. Canyon had intended to bury Ridge right there on that trail, to vanish him like so many other victims before. And then the news that haunted me for weeks. The body of a hiker from 2013, long missing, buried not far from the shelter. Canyon had been walking these trails, isolating his victims, and getting away with it because the Appalachian Trail is massive, wild, and people just disappear. Even at home, I couldn't relax. Nights were the worst. I'd close my eyes and see Canyon's face, that twisted mix of anger and predation. I kept thinking about all the other hikers out there, trusting, alone, oblivious. And about Ridge, how lucky he had been, how clever he'd had to be just to survive. The thought that Canyon had done this before, had gotten away with murder once, maybe twice, made me hyper-aware of every noise outside my windows, every shadow in the trees. The trial was intense. I testified, detailing what I'd seen, what I'd done to keep Canyon alive, and the evidence of Ridge's belongings in Canyon's pack. Canyon tried to spin it, but the facts were undeniable. The ID, the blood patterns, Ridge's story, all matched up. He was sentenced to life without parole for 2 counts of murder and 1 attempted murder. Ridge survived, but he was left with scars that no one sees, deep down in places you can't fix. I often think back to that trail clearing. The blood, the torn gear, the twisted story. Canyon had almost turned my instincts against me, made me the unwitting accomplice to another murder. The entire time I was trying to be helpful, he was feeding me lies, testing me, seeing if I could be manipulated. It's terrifying to think how easily a person can disguise themselves in the woods. Hikers blend in. Same gear, same backpacks, same casual greetings. But some of them are predators, watching, waiting, lying in plain sight. Trail life is supposed to be about camaraderie, sharing firelight with strangers, swapping stories, keeping an eye on each other. That trust, that isolation, is exactly what predators exploit. Canyon knew how to manipulate a good Samaritan like me. That knowledge sticks with me more than the bruises Ridge carried or the torn packs left behind. Predators study, stalk, and strike where no one will notice. And they know the trail will protect them because no one expects evil in that quiet, green wilderness. I've hiked since then, but I'm not naive. My eyes are open in ways they weren't before. I double-check IDs, I question every story that doesn't add up, and I never get too comfortable around anyone claiming to be hurt or lost. I know now that the trail can hide monsters, even in broad daylight, and that instinct is the only real weapon you have against someone like Canyon. Ridge is doing okay now, physically at least. Emotionally, some scars never heal. He's careful, always watching, always questioning. But he's alive, and that's the main thing. The reminder of how close death was that day lingers for both of us. I'm thankful I noticed the wallet in the chaos. That small, mundane detail was the difference between life and death for Ridge. And it saved me from unknowingly aiding a killer. The lesson hit hard. The wilderness isn't just unpredictable because of weather or terrain. The people out there can be just as dangerous. Canyon exploited that isolation, that trust, that instinct to help. He took advantage of everything hikers hold sacred: safety in numbers, empathy, and goodwill. And the terrifying part? He's not unique. The trail is long, and there are always potential predators walking among the unsuspecting, wearing the same boots, carrying the same packs, speaking the same casual slang, blending perfectly, until the moment they reveal their true nature. So I stay vigilant. Every trail, every clearing, every shelter carries the memory of that night. I don't sleep as soundly in remote woods as I used to. I watch shadows more carefully. I check and double-check packs, IDs, and behavior. And I tell every hiker I meet, trust your gut, question inconsistencies, and be ready to defend yourself, even against someone who seems hurt or desperate. Not everyone is on the trail for the same reasons you are. Some are there to take advantage, to manipulate, to kill. Thinking about it, the Appalachian Trail is beautiful, peaceful, and isolating all at once. And while most people are good, the few who aren't can make a moment of trust deadly. Canyon could have been the reason Ridge, or even I, never walked out of that forest alive. That thought, even now, chills me to the bone. I'm thankful Ridge fought back. I'm thankful I saw that ID. I'm thankful Canyon is behind bars where he can't prey on anyone else. But the memory of that night, the terror, the lies, the threat hiding behind human skin, it's something that never leaves you. The trail is out there, beautiful and dangerous. And sometimes, the most terrifying things aren't the steep cliffs, the wild animals, or the storms. They're the humans you don't see coming. I had been planning this stretch of the trail for months. I wanted to see something most hikers talk about, but almost nobody actually witnesses: the Gloom Hollow Lights. For anyone unfamiliar, Gloom Hollow sits deep in western North Carolina, and for over a century, people have reported these strange, floating lights that hover over the mountains. Scientists claim they're reflections from car headlights, swamp gases, or odd weather patterns, but locals insist there's something else entirely, something that doesn't obey any laws of physics we know. I'm normally skeptical. I'm an engineer by trade. I like hard data, evidence, and things that make logical sense. Most mysteries tend to have explanations once you dig deep enough. But I've always been drawn to the unexplained, and the Gloom Hollow Lights were the perfect mix. Easy enough to access, yet creepy as hell. I timed my hike to line up with a new moon, thinking darkness would give me the best shot at seeing the phenomenon. I didn't expect ghosts or magic. I just wanted a glimpse of something strange, something science couldn't fully explain. I reached my campsite around 4 p.m. on the second day. It was a flat clearing just a couple of miles from the ridge, with a crystal-clear view of the hollow below. Ideal for light watching. I pitched my tent, cooked a quick dinner, and settled on a boulder with my camera, waiting for nightfall. The weather was perfect, cool, crisp, with no clouds to obscure the stars. As darkness fell, I saw it first. A pale, yellowish orb hovering above the ridge like a lantern caught in midair. It drifted slowly left to right before disappearing entirely. My heart leapt. I actually saw one. I raised my camera and started filming, hoping to capture more. Soon, another appeared, and then another. Within 15 minutes, 5 or 6 floated across the mountainside, appearing and vanishing at random. The sight was mesmerizing. The lights pulsed gently, dimming and brightening as they moved, hypnotic in their rhythm. I lost track of time, completely absorbed. But then I noticed something strange. The lights weren't staying put. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they were drifting closer. At first, I blamed the darkness, my eyes playing tricks. But soon it was undeniable. They were moving toward me. By 9:30, the nearest orb was only about 100 yards away, at tree height. My stomach nodded. These weren't just glowing orbs, they had depth, like I was peering into living things, and they seemed aware of me. When I shifted position, they hesitated or altered their course. When I stepped forward, they advanced. When I retreated, they followed. Panic began to creep in. I walked back toward my tent, trying to stay calm while keeping my eyes on the lights. They mirrored me, keeping a steady distance but never leaving. Once at my campsite, I turned to look at them. A dozen now hovered in a loose semicircle, maybe 50 feet from the tent. They pulsed rhythmically, almost like breathing, and I could feel a weight in the air, an almost tangible attention pressing on me. I reached for my phone, hoping to capture the scene. The moment I powered it on, it died. Battery at 65% just minutes ago. Gone. I tried my flashlight, then my headlamp. Both failed instantly, flickering out as soon as I clicked them on. I was trapped in darkness, surrounded by glowing eyes, or something like eyes, and nothing worked. One orb drifted closer, about 10 feet from me, radiating warmth. Not hot, but like standing near embers. Then came the pull, a mental tug that felt like it was reaching inside me, whispering to step closer, to touch, to follow. A part of me, not fully mine, began to obey. My foot moved forward against my conscious will. The sudden awareness jolted me back. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my tent, and yelled, a raw scream of fear and defiance. The lights recoiled a few steps, pulsing furiously, but did not leave. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever these things were, they were dangerous, and worse, they could manipulate my mind. I shoved my sleeping bag into my pack, tore down the tent, and started moving. I went off trail, blindly heading in the general direction of the nearest road. The lights followed, keeping pace, never attacking but constantly present. My legs bled from thorns and roots, my face scraped by branches I couldn't see. But I kept moving, driven by sheer terror. Every time I paused, that pull tugged harder, that insidious voice whispering to walk back into the lights. I couldn't stop. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes, until the first pale gray of dawn filtered through the trees. I finally stopped to catch my breath and realized I was lost. I pulled out my compass and map. By rough estimation, I had covered 5 miles in total darkness, off trail, without serious injury. A feat that shouldn't have been possible. With shaky determination, I aimed for the nearest road, flagging down a pickup around 8 a.m. The driver gave me a wide-eyed look, taking in my scratched-up, wild appearance, and didn't ask questions. On the way into town, I asked about the lights. He nodded slowly. Seen 'em plenty of times, but getting close, not everyone comes back the same. Some folks lose time. Some vanish. I sat in a diner for hours, trying to make sense of what had happened. I eventually called a friend to pick me up and drive me back to my car. I left the campsite, my tent, my remaining gear. I just wanted out of the mountains. At home, everything worked fine again. Phone, flashlight, headlamp, all fully charged. But the photos and videos were mostly corrupted. Digital static where the lights had been. Only one frame survived. The orb hovered in the frame, and in the reflection of the camera lens, I could see myself, but not where I remembered standing. I was further back, like the camera had captured where I would be, not where I had been. Even stranger, I noticed missing time. My watch, phone, and other devices showed 11 hours had passed. But I only remembered roughly 5. 6 hours were gone. I don't know what happened during that period, or what the lights did to me while I was under their influence. I'm not sure I want to know. Some mysteries are better left alone. Some lights are better left unwatched. The gloom hollow lights still appear on clear nights, still calling to the curious or the foolish. I escaped once, and I don't plan to return. Even days later, the memory of that night clung to me like a second skin. I kept seeing the orbs in the corner of my vision, shimmering at the edges of reality, even when I was back in the safety of my apartment. The warmth, the tug, the way they had looked at me. I couldn't shake it. I kept replaying that moment when I realized I had been moving without control, stepping toward the lights against my own will. That was the part that scared me the most. I've hiked in storms, been lost in dense fog, survived wild animal encounters, but nothing had ever intruded on my mind like that. It was as if the lights weren't just physical entities. They were predators that could manipulate thought, twist intention, and snatch your will like a thread. After a few restless nights, I convinced myself to return to the footage. Maybe analyzing it frame by frame would help me rationalize the event, find a natural explanation. I booted up my laptop, loaded the corrupted files, and stared. Digital noise blanketed most of the footage, but the surviving frame still glowed faintly on the screen. The orb hung in the darkness, motionless, or almost motionless. But I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the faint reflection of my tense outline, the orb wasn't alone. There were faint, shadowy shapes just at the edge of visibility, like silhouettes leaning in, watching. My heart froze. The more I stared, the more convinced I became that whatever I saw in the hollow that night wasn't singular. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue, stress, or the way my brain had processed isolation and darkness. But every rational explanation crumbled the moment I remembered the pull, the mental tug that almost made me walk into the lights. That wasn't a trick of the eyes. That was something actively reaching into me, trying to claim me. Weeks passed, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night I checked the news, hoping for another report of hikers seeing the lights. But nothing. Locals seemed eerily casual when I asked about them. One bartender at a diner smirked and said, "People see them all the time. Ain't many who come back in one piece, though." She didn't elaborate, just winked and poured me another coffee. My stomach turned. One piece? Driven by a mix of fear and obsession, I decided to go back. Not to approach the lights, not to watch, but to verify the area, the terrain, and see if I could find my old campsite. I hiked cautiously, daylight only, following the trail as close as I could approximate it. Everything looked normal, peaceful, deceptively serene. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. Birds chirped, squirrels darted from branch to branch. But I remembered the darkness, the unnatural warmth, the pull. It felt like the mountain was laughing quietly. When I reached the clearing, I froze. The ground was scarred, the soil trampled, as if something massive had been dragged across it. My tent stakes were gone. My old campfire pit had collapsed, and etched faintly into the dirt were strange, looping impressions, like footprints, but not quite human. My pulse hammered. I had to keep moving, but I couldn't resist looking back. The valley below was empty, calm. No sign of movement, but I felt them. That same oppressive attention from the night before, hovering just beyond sight. I documented everything carefully, but my hands shook. I kept imagining the orbs drifting down from the ridge, their glow cutting through trees, edges pulsing like eyes. That night I camped farther down the trail, not daring to sleep at the original site. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind made me jolt upright. My imagination didn't need much help. The hollow had a way of warping perception, making every shadow alive. It was around midnight when I saw it again. At first, I thought I was dreaming. A soft, pale glow emerging over the treetops, drifting slowly toward me. My heart raced. I froze, hoping it was a reflection, a trick. But the light wasn't random. It moved with purpose. My skin crawled. I thought about fleeing, but the memory of the pull and the knowledge that I could lose hours, maybe forever, made me hesitate. This time, I wasn't going to let it get me. I packed quickly, stumbled through the forest, and hiked until dawn, navigating entirely by the sun's first light. By morning, I reached a road again, my muscles screaming, body battered by brambles and exhaustion. I flagged down a truck, barely able to speak, and rode into town. The driver eyed me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. The lights had been here, and now I had proof. Not photographic, not digital, but visceral, real, undeniable. Once home, everything seemed normal again. My electronics worked perfectly. Phone fully charged, flashlight functional, headlamp bright. But the sense of dread never left. I couldn't eat properly. Sleep came in fragments, dreams filled with floating orbs, soft warmth, and that tug in my mind. I woke sometimes, heart pounding, feeling the hollow reach for me, even though I was hundreds of miles away. Then I noticed the missing hours. My devices all confirmed it. Roughly 6 hours of that night were unaccounted for. I remembered fragments. The first appearance at 8:30, hiking away after 9:30. But then the next thing I knew, dawn had broken, and I was 5 miles from my campsite. What happened during that lost time? I have no clue. Did the lights take me somewhere? Did they reach inside me, play with my memory, bend my will? I don't want to know, but I can feel the scars in my mind every day. I tried sharing my story with friends, but they laughed, called it overactive imagination or isolation hysteria. Only hikers who've spent nights alone in deep wilderness understood, nodding with a quiet fear I couldn't explain. And every time I close my eyes at night, I see them hovering, pulsing, watching, waiting for the next foolhardy soul to wander too close. I will never go back. The mountains call, the lights still appear on clear nights, and whoever, or whatever they are patient. They wait, they watch, and they take. I escaped once, that's all I know. I survived. But if I had faltered, just a little, I wouldn't be here to tell this tale. Some mysteries are better left alone. Some lights are better left in the dark. And some nights, deep in the hollow, it's best not to look too closely, or you might never come back at all. It all went down in late November of 2019. I was trying a tough, late-season section hike through the White Mountains in New Hampshire. I knew the timing was sketchy. November there isn't forgiving. Temperatures dive below zero at night, winds whip like knives, and snow or freezing rain can hit without warning. Most hikers had already called it quits for the year, waiting for spring. But I wasn't in a reasonable place mentally. Life had just punched me in the gut. A brutal breakup, a layoff thanks to corporate downsizing, and everything in my world seemed to be unraveling. I needed something raw, something that demanded every ounce of focus. Survival. So, I mapped out this late-season trek, fully aware it was risky, fully believing I could handle it. The forecast warned of a storm system barreling through the area. I convinced myself I could outpace it. I was dead wrong. On day 3, the snowstorm hit with a vengeance. What should have been a light dusting turned into a full-blown blizzard by early afternoon. Visibility plummeted to near zero. The wind shrieked through the peaks and the cold bit deep. I was aiming for a shelter 6 miles ahead, but the storm was closing in faster than I could move. Hypothermia loomed, and my gloves couldn't stop my fingers from going numb. That's when I saw him. A figure in the swirl of white, just off the trail, waving frantically. As I drew closer, I could see he was a man, maybe in his 50s, decked out in standard winter hiking gear. He yelled over the roar of the storm, offering me shelter. He claimed his cabin was just a quarter-mile off the trail and that he lived there year-round, often helping lost or stranded hikers. His name was Carter, and he proudly called himself a trail guardian, someone who stepped in when the mountains got cruel. I was frozen, bone-deep tired, and straight-up terrified. The promise of warmth and safety sounded like salvation. I followed him off the trail. True to his word, about 15 minutes later, we reached a small cabin tucked into the pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and golden light spilled from the windows. It looked perfect. Carter opened the door and ushered me in. The warmth hit me like a wave. Hours in the blizzard had left me numb, shivering, and soaked to the skin. Inside, the cabin was rustic but cozy. A wood stove roared in the corner, comfy furniture scattered around, a small kitchen nook, and a couple of bedrooms branching off the main room. Carter fussed over me instantly, pulling off my wet layers, seating me near the stove and brewing tea. He started prepping a hot meal while chatting about other hikers he had rescued, life in the mountains, and his love for the trail. On the surface, he seemed like the quintessential trail angel, a friendly guy with a heart for hikers. But as my body thawed and my mind cleared, things started to feel off. First, he locked the door behind us, deadbolt clicking into place. When I asked, he claimed it was to keep heat in and wind out, but something about it didn't sit right. And the way he watched me, it wasn't concern, it was possessive, calculating, like he was sizing me up. Then my eyes wandered around the cabin. Newspaper clippings were plastered on one wall. Missing hikers. After scrolling closer, I recognized some names from online forums and community posts, while others were unfamiliar. Dozens of them, meticulously cut and pinned like some grotesque shrine. I asked Carter about the wall. For a split second, the friendly act slipped. His eyes went cold. He muttered that it was important to remember them, honor the lost, keep track of mountain dangers. His words didn't feel like respect. They felt like obsession. My stomach dropped. Something was very wrong. When I suggested I should get back to the trail, at least as far as the next shelter, he flipped. His calm demeanor vanished. He insisted I couldn't leave. The storm was too fierce, and I'd be risking my life. Then he said it, the words that made my blood run cold. You need to stay until spring. Not should, not it's safer. Need. My instincts screamed at me. Something in his gaze and tone told me this wasn't about my safety. It was about control. Then I realized the tea he gave me, it wasn't just warm, it was slowing me down. My thoughts felt thick, fuzzy, and heavy. Panic clawed at my chest. He wasn't just an overzealous caretaker. He had a system. Hike a hiker off the trail, get them in the cabin, drug them, and what? That wall of clippings gave me the sick answer. My body was getting sluggish, coordination slipping. But adrenaline surged. I forced myself to stand, clutching the chair for support. Carter's voice took on a silky, hypnotic rhythm. "Sit down. Relax. It's for your own good." I saw the calculation in his eyes. Was he going to physically restrain me, or let the drugs finish the job? I couldn't wait to find out. I grabbed the kettle sitting on the stove. The water wasn't boiling, but it was hot enough. I swung it at him. Carter yelped, recoiled, and in that split second, I lunged for the door. Fumbling with the deadbolt, hands shaking and slow, I managed to throw myself into the blizzard outside. The cold slammed into me, and for a second I was lost. Which way was the trail? I didn't care. I ran anyway. Carter's yelling faded behind me, pushing me forward. I stumbled through the storm, lungs burning, body heavy, every step a fight. Hypothermia and drugs teamed up against me, trying to drag me down. I fell, got back up, kept moving. Stopping meant death. At some point, I collapsed onto what felt like flat ground. A blur of white. I must have reached the trail. A couple of snowmobilers spotted me. By morning, a search and rescue team had me in their care. I woke up in the hospital, frostbite claiming 3 fingers, hypothermia nearly lethal. I was alive. The police listened to my story. Carter, the cabin, the clippings, the drugged tea. They found the cabin just where I said. Carter was arrested on the spot. Inside, beyond the main floor, they discovered a basement fitted like a cell. Chains, mattress, a bucket, stockpiled food, journals detailing his obsession with hikers. Several of the missing hiker cases were reopened, though nothing definitively proved they were imprisoned before. The evidence was enough for drugging, assault, and attempted kidnapping charges. Carter tried to claim mental illness, insisting he was saving hikers. Maybe in his warped mind he believed it, but it didn't make it any less terrifying. He was a wolf in trail clothing, hunting vulnerable hikers under the guise of safety. I survived. But I lost more than fingers. My trust, my faith in the kindness of strangers, even the trail community, was shattered. Carter had preyed on that very trust, and I will never forget the wall of missing hikers, names, faces, victims of the mountains, or of him. Some hikers are angels, others are predators, and sometimes the difference isn't clear until you're already in the storm. Waking up in that hospital bed, I couldn't shake the terror from my body. The frostbite on my fingers throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the chills crawling down my spine every time I thought about Carter. I kept replaying his cabin, that locked door, the wall of missing hikers. Every detail burned into my memory. The police ran their investigation, but I had to sit there and try to explain everything I saw while half-drugged and exhausted. Words felt weak. How could anyone truly grasp what it's like to be in a stranger's cabin, locked in, your mind clouded, and feel that predator's gaze on you like a wolf stalking prey? They went through my description, compared it with their findings, and they found the basement exactly as I had said. Chains on the wall, a mattress, a bucket, evidence of food stockpiled for months. They even found journals. Carter meticulously documented everything, his plans, his obsessions, his warped justifications. The investigators told me that the missing hiker's wall on his cabin's main room lined up with unsolved disappearances over the last decade. Some names they recognized from official reports, others from local forums and blogs. They couldn't prove he'd held anyone before me, but the thought that he might have, it made my stomach twist. I spent a week in the hospital, the frostbite claiming the tips of 2 fingers permanently. Each bandaged hand felt like a reminder of how close I had come to becoming another name on that wall. My body healed, but the terror lingered. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the mental shadow of what Carter represented. Before this, I'd believed in trail angels, the kind of people who genuinely help hikers. But Carter proved how easily that trust could be weaponized. He had been a respected part of the trail community, known for helping people. That same reputation became his camouflage. He studied the hikers, learned their weaknesses, and preyed on them under the guise of generosity. I could feel the same methodical calculation in his eyes I had felt the night I escaped. The thought hit me that many others weren't so lucky. How many hikers had followed a friendly stranger offering warmth, only to vanish, swallowed by the forest or by Carter's obsession? The missing hikers, their faces pinned neatly on the wall, were no longer just stories. They were warnings. The police closed in on him after I gave every detail I could. They found his journals, the records of every hiker he'd saved, notes on storms, maps of the forest trails, and even drug schedules. Every precaution, every layer of control was written down. He was a meticulous predator. Reading through those pages, I realized he had planned this over years. His method wasn't impulsive, it was chillingly premeditated. Carter's trial was a blur. He claimed mental illness, insisted he was saving people from themselves, from the unforgiving mountains. Maybe, in his twisted mind, he truly believed it. But his protection involved deception, drugs, and imprisonment. That made it no less horrifying. I often think about that blizzard. The way the storm and his drugged tea nearly ended me. Hypothermia and chemicals pulling me toward unconsciousness, while his voice echoed in my ears, calm, hypnotic, controlling. I replay that final moment when I grabbed the kettle, the roar of the water, and the pure panic-fueled adrenaline that propelled me into the storm. That moment saved my life. It's insane to think how close I was to being trapped, possibly forever. Even now, months later, I have nightmares. Not just of the blizzard, not just of Carter, but of the cold emptiness of that basement, the sense of dread in his cabin, the locked door, and the wall of missing hikers. Sometimes I see glimpses in the back of my mind, the glint of his eyes, the way he measured me like I was prey. The trail feels different now. Every act of kindness makes me hesitate. Every friendly hiker or offer of help carries a shadow. I don't trust strangers easily anymore, even those who call themselves trail angels. Some people are genuine. Others wear the same mask but are predators beneath. And sometimes the difference is almost impossible to see until it's too late. I've gone back to hiking, but only in groups, in the daylight, and only on well-trodden paths. I don't do late-season treks alone anymore. The mountains are beautiful, yes, but they are ruthless. And people can be even more dangerous. The combination of nature's cruelty and human predation is lethal. Every time I tell this story, I feel compelled to warn others. Pay attention to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. A locked cabin, two friendly strangers, odd obsessions. Don't ignore them. That night in the blizzard showed me that survival isn't just about knowing how to navigate the forest. Trail angels exist, true, but so do wolves masquerading as saviors. And sometimes, you only find out which is which when the storm is howling, your body is freezing, and a stranger tells you you need to stay. I keep my story close, share it cautiously, and always check the weather before I hike. Every late-season trip carries the memory of that night. The frostbite on my fingers is a permanent reminder, but so is the fear etched into my mind. That fear keeps me alive. That fear makes me aware that in the mountains, survival isn't guaranteed. Not from the elements, and not from people. And I'll never forget Carter. Not the man I met in the storm, smiling and helpful, but the monster behind that smile. The predator behind the trail angel mask. The one who showed me that sometimes the greatest danger in the wilderness isn't the cold, the snow, or the terrain. It's the person standing just off the trail, waiting for someone desperate enough to follow.